It is Tuesday, October 9th, and the Eastern Pacific is all quiet, but we do have some action to talk about in the Atlantic. We have an area of low pressure just to the east of Bermuda. The Hurricane Center is giving that feature a 10% chance of development, and the feature that has caught our interest a little bit more is this tropical wave situated in the central Atlantic. Currently, the 48-hour probability of development into a tropical depression is being set at 20%. The latest surface analysis from the Tropical Analysis Forecast branch shows that the 1012 millibar surface low near Bermuda is about to be absorbed by this cold front moving out of the east coast. Meanwhile, we have a 1008 millibar surface low associated with the tropical wave in the central Atlantic. Today's visible satellite animation shows widespread disorganized convection out across the southwest Caribbean. This activity is related to the monsoon trough, and this area of low pressure will move westward into the inland portions of Central America. No development is expected in that area. To the north, we see the broad area of low pressure just to the east of the Bahamas. It's being stretched out from south to north in advance of this approaching cold front that we see swinging out across the central Florida peninsula, and we've got a lot of southwest vertical wind shear aloft, so no development is expected there. However, interest in Bermuda should be expecting more in the way of showers and thunderstorms, and that is what the Bermuda Weather Service is calling for between Wednesday through Friday. More importantly, this is the tropical wave that has a little bit more potential to develop. It's starting to move into the picture coming in from the central Atlantic, and it's going to take about another 72 hours to reach the lesser Antilles. And as we turn on the enhanced infrared, you can see that there is widespread numerous convection, but it's still somewhat disorganized at this time. And this comes as no surprise because we have a very large upper level low immediately to the north, and this is helping to induce a lot of westerly vertical wind shear, and we expect the shear to remain for at least another 48 to 72 hours. So no development is expected during this time, despite the 20% probability being given by the National Hurricane Center. The latest wind shear chart confirms the presence of 40 to even 50 knots of westerly vertical wind shear in some spots out across the central Atlantic. You can see this as well on the color representation, so this is a very hostile pattern for any development in the short term. However, this upper level low may begin to flatten out between days 3 and 4, and we may start to see a more organized area of low pressure try to develop near the Virgin Islands within the 3 to 5 day time frame. The Madden-Julian oscillation is also being forecast by several models to move into the more favorable octants of 1 and 8 over the next 5 to 10 days, so this would also help to enhance the probability of tropical cyclogenesis within the next week or so. The Canadian CMC model has the reputation of being often too aggressive with tropical cyclone development, and although we don't see much in the way of formation within 48 to 72 hours, beyond day 3 the CMC is clearly developing a tropical cyclone as it starts to pass over Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, and by day 6 it's situated over the eastern Bahamas. What you are now looking at is the initialized shear pattern on the CMC model guidance, and it clearly shows the 40 to 50 knots of vertical wind shear, so that is the correct initialization, and the CMC is forecasting that shear to remain over the next 48 hours, so there's really not much of a change here. But as we start to go into 96 hours or day 4, there is a little bit more in the way of upper level ridging, with the upper level ridge centered just to the south of San Juan, Puerto Rico. And by day 5 we have a fairly favorable pattern, at least in terms of the vertical winds aloft, with upper level ridging out across Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. The 12Z run of the GFS model is far less aggressive compared to the Canadian, and it shows little to no development within the first 72 to 96 hours, and it also begins to lift the area of low pressure a little bit more toward the north compared to what we just saw with the CMC run. But nevertheless, by day 7 we do still see an area of low pressure just to the north of the Virgin Islands that would bear some watching. The following animation is the GFS 300 millibar forecast, and this can tell us what is happening more so with the upper level lows and ridges, and we can see that the upper level low is correctly initialized just to the north of where the tropical wave is currently located, and the upper level low is going to remain in this general vicinity for the next 5 or so days, but thereafter it starts to lift a little bit more toward the north, and that's why we feel as though the upper level conditions could become a little bit more favorable and give us at least some period in which we could see at least a tropical depression or tropical storm potentially form. If not, then at least a very suspect area of low pressure on the cusp of becoming a tropical depression. With that in mind, this is now the latest GFS shear forecast, and as we look at the 0 hour, here is the westerly vertical wind shear analyzed, and as we go into 48 hours, once again there's very little change. By 72 hours we start to see that upper level low start to lift a little bit more toward the north, so therefore the vertical wind shear values are beginning to lessen as we approach South America, and as we work our way into day 4 and day 5 we do have some decent upper level ridging situated over the lesser Antilles, And the exact track of the surface low is going to be equally as important, because if it lifts to the north too quickly, then it's still going to have to deal with a lot of southwest vertical wind shear. But if it remains right around 20 degrees north or stays just to the south of there, it's going to have more favorable upper level winds to work with. The eastern United States has had a pretty decent taste of fall and even winter-like conditions in some areas, and that is thanks to a lot of cold fronts sweeping out of southern Canada, and we are still continuing to see at least a somewhat similar pattern being progged by the GFS model over the next 6 or 7 days. And even if ridging does sporadically develop over the southeast, we are still seeing a lot of troughiness out across the Great Lakes and northeast, so it's going to be rather difficult for anything developing in the eastern Caribbean to continue to move northwest in the general direction of the United States. But as always, we'll keep a very close watch on things for you here at 28storms.com. Finally, here's a quick look at the ECMWF forecast for the next 7 days. We don't see much on the charts over the next 24 and 48 hours. However, you can see the broad area of low pressure associated with the tropical wave starting to work its way into the Lesser Antilles within the next 2 to 3 days. And as we go into day 4, we start to see a little bit more organization directly over Puerto Rico. By day 5, we start to see that the upper level conditions are apparently becoming better, because we are starting to see a 1009 millibar surface low becoming a little better organized once it moves into the southwest Atlantic. And this run of the European is projecting at least subtropical development once the storm is just to the east of the Bahamas. But as we mentioned just a moment ago, as long as we still continue to see a series of troughs out across the Great Lakes region, it's going to be very difficult for anything to make a direct impact along the U.S. East Coast, so anything that forms in the East Caribbean or Southwest Atlantic is likely to take a turn toward the north and eventually toward the northeast. So the bottom line is no development or little in the way of development is expected over the next 48 hours, but thereafter conditions could gradually improve, and this tropical wave could develop into the next tropical depression, if not even the next tropical storm of the season. If it were to be named, it would be Patty. But even if development were to not occur, then interest across the Lesser Antilles and Virgin Islands could still anticipate more in the way of showers, thunderstorms, and gusty winds. So this is certainly a system that interests out there across the East Caribbean should keep an eye on, and we will certainly have more updates for you here at 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app.